You're listening to Dead Air Podcast, part of splatterpictures.net.
What's up, everybody? Wes, Dead Air Knipe here with always
Typical Lydia.
Today's show, we're going to be doing the 2002 cult classic Dog Soldiers. That's my camera noise.
That's your camera noise. I think that is the thing that stands out the most to me is the very, very end, the end credit sequences, seeing those black and white photos that were being shot through the thing. And that's the weirdest thing to stand out, and I wait for it every time I watch this. I've watched this movie maybe 10 times. I've watched it a lot. I like it quite a bit. And every time since the first time, I look forward to the end credits. You've watched this movie a good number of times, I'm sure?
Yeah, I remember when it landed on the movie network when I would have been in 2002, so I would have been like 19ish or something like that, and I would catch it several times as it was on. Watching it kind of back in those days, what would end up happening is you would watch a movie all the way through at least once, and then you would just catch it periodically on TV, like at different times, and you just like watch it for the rest of the way through. Yeah, very affecting. It always reminded me of the end of Night of the Living Dead a little bit, just a lot of still images, and it definitely catches your attention. I wanted to start the episode a little bit with a funny noise, but I didn't want to do a werewolf howl because every time that there's a werewolf in it, I just go, arr, and I was like, I gotta fucking think of something else. But then spontaneous creativity, Lids, I remembered the camera.
That is perfect spontaneous creativity, Wes. Because yes, we're going to be doing another werewolf movie. If you really want to howl, you can, because there won't be many other sounds to go along with the howling, which is going to be our other werewolf sandwich film.
Yeah, we decided to do 2 werewolf films for reasons I don't really remember anymore. It's been a minute since we recorded. How are you, Lydia?
I am very, very well. I have not been sleeping. It's a terrible affliction, insomnia, which was cured for the longest time. So if I'm a little bit dopey, it'll be like a callback to our earlier episodes where I was probably drunk and also insomniac. So it might be a little foggy here and there, but I've been good. It's been a bit of a summertime, and I think that's why mostly we haven't recorded, because we've been busy. We've been going places. Like I went to the StokerCon in Pittsburgh, and like I had some company, so I went to what I would consider the only real authentic British pub in Canada, really, so far that I've seen. I've seen a lot of different pubs, and I was on the Visceral Pleasures with the Horror Spinsters to talk about the August Underground trilogy, some films that we might have mentioned here and there, but that sort of dark, roughy stuff we don't talk about on the show. So it was a neat change of pace to talk about some more like Blind Torture cast type films. So that was really cool. But yeah, how have you been, Wes? What have you been up to?
I've been very good. I'm writing very heavily in scripting phases for Aurora 3. So that is what's going on. After a year-long hiatus, issue 13 of Teresa is done, waiting on pages and stuff like that. So yeah, it's just been a lot of writing, and then summertime stuff, vacationing stuff, and just not really had a lot of opportunity to really sit down and record. It seemed every time I was free a weekend, you were busy, and every time, vice versa. So yeah, that's really all I've been doing.
That cottage life is something, though, and maybe we should just still be doing a Friday the 13th at least once a summer. There's still lots to choose from. I mean, we got more episodes of Teresa now than we have of Friday the 13th now, don't we? Or we will, anyway.
We will. At least
one.
officially written. Yeah. Well, that does that Peacock show coming out? Does that count as like?
I don't know. Does like, but then the Don't Go in the Woods Alone or whatever, those fan films that were fantastic.
Don't hike
entries.
alone. Yeah.
Don't Hike Alone. Yeah, that's it. Fantastic, and I would love to count those. I mean, something a little more official. Is Sean Cunningham part of the series?
I believe so, and they got fucking Adrian King back somehow.
Yeah.
So
it does feel
very.
right.
It does feel right. We'll see. People want to know what old Wes thinks about anything Friday the 13th, and I always say, probably to people's surprise, it's done in my mind. I was like, there are 12 amazing flicks. They're not all good, but there's 12 movies, and I like most of them except for one, really. And I don't know, man. Like I it's hard to get excited because I was just like, I don't really want to go back. But they're like, oh, we're gonna do I was like, I don't understand why everyone needs to go back. I don't understand why we always need to do prequels. And I guess the idea is like, well, there needs to be. It can't just be Jason as fully formed, just like killing teenagers in the woods. I was like, yeah, it ought to be, because that's what it is. You can't. He's a Charlie Brown Christmas tree. You cannot put that bulb on the top of him, that sparkling bauble, because the whole thing's gonna fall over.
Mm-hmm. It's very, very true. And I mean, knowing what I know of you and your love for Jason Voorhees knows no bounds, but you have an even bigger love for the new movie monster. You want the next big slasher hero. Like you've been waiting for him. You've been hedging your bets on like Chrome Skull or the Slipmouth Woman, and I don't know about Malignant, but that was like getting in there and like, yeah.
I think that for me, you're absolutely right. I am looking for the next new thing. And here's the cool thing. There's been a lot of really fucking cool horror that's come out. There's been a lot of slashers that have come out that have kind of gotten people buzzing. And so I think that there's a potential for something to really excite people, but we'll see. I mean, there tends to be a bit of a trend these days for boutique horror and with an art house kind of bent to it. Not everything, obviously, because there's some some pretty sleazy throwback stuff also is getting made, but just the stuff that's getting into theaters and has a lot of bigness behind it. Speaking of this exact conversation, I have been going back and listening to our previous catalog lids, and I have like a couple of things that I want to like get off my chest by listening to our old episodes. If you could indulge me for a minute.
Oh, absolutely.
I really want to apologize for fucking interrupting you as much as I do.
It's easier now with editing. I can edit out any interruptions and fix them.
You can, and you do, and you ought to. But I got to stop talking for so long, and I've got to stop bringing up the same. For a fucking decade, Lydia, I have been talking about how the way that we consume media has changed. It always seems to be like it's just happening. 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I'm always talking about, nowadays, people aren't getting, there's so much immediacy, and there's so much content, and there's so much this and there's so much that we don't have time to sit on movies like we used to, and they can't really build a huge cult following anymore because it's on to the next thing. I've been saying that for 10 fucking years, Lydia. So trank me the next time I start saying that.
Oh, I don't know if I'd have the heart to actually trank you. That's excellent. That escalated there, sir. But yeah, it has changed. And you have a point. You always have a point. But we don't go back typically and listen to what we say. And half the time, 10 minutes after we say this, we forget what we said because we're having a conversation, right? For the most part. So if we were scripted, we would have like editors telling us what we do and don't say. I mean, there's also things that we did in the show really well that we sort of forget to do. I thought horror experiments were hilarious when we would call out something that was done in a movie and be like, okay, seriously, if I put Wes in that box and then doused it with gasoline, how long do you think? You know, that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
That we don't do anymore. But it's because we're having conversations and we don't typically think of what we do as bits, where maybe harping about the way that we've watched movies has changed was your bit, Wes.
It's a bit that I seem to want to make painfully fucking obvious as often as possible. I really need to learn to find something new to be observant about. So that's going to be my goal from now on.
What I think is funny is listening back to some older episodes is how we always think that we talk about Alien all of the time. We think we talk about Scooby-Doo all of the time, and we really don't. We don't talk. It's not every episode that we talk about Scooby-Doo and the Alien. Like, maybe we should. I don't know. Maybe that's our bit. I don't really know. But I also like that we think of, we were talking to Thomas. Hello, Thomas, if you're listening, about what one of our favorite episodes from past episodes, and it was both of us, and I didn't chime in because I forgot to. The Loved Ones episode was a very strong episode. And then for me to realize how long ago that was our 11th episode. I thought it was like episode 50, where I felt like we got a bit of a groove and a bit of a pattern down. 11, episode 11, we had it locked in. Not bad.
Not bad. I think it really depends on the movie. I honestly think that it makes sense because that's the spine in which we build every episode. What is the movie even about anyways? And if one of us, you can tell when one of us is less excited than the other person about the movie. And you can't predict that. You can't plan that. I would never want to. But I think the reason why The Loved Ones was so strong is we were so excited about that movie. I believe that was the first time I'd seen it, and I was very enthusiastic about it. It was our Haunt episode. I was very enthusiastic about that episode because that movie just blew my mind. I thought it was fucking amazing. Not perfect, but it was amazing, and it's super cool. And guess what? October's right around the corner. So, yeah.
Nice. Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. There were some films, like even like sleeper hits, kind of to me, The Perfection, things that we both enjoyed very much. We had a lot to say about it, especially if they're newer films that talk about old things and bring the highlights of older films to light in a new way through this new film that is an homage, whether they know it or not, to these older films, or older films like even like kind of bona fide stinkers in a way, like Edge of the Axe, or really cool hidden gems like Blood Rage. We had so much fun with those two films, you know, for different reasons, but yeah, we've had a lot of people talking about the show lately. To us, I think the switch to Anchor, I think that just surpassing such a huge milestone of 200 episodes, 10 years, those sorts of things have really brought it into focus lately. So yeah, Halloween is just around the corner, so you'll get to watch Haunt again, and we'll have to come up with something cool to watch for the show.
We will. I am enthusiastic to talk about Dog Soldiers, mostly because I haven't seen that film in quite a few years. I don't even own it, actually. I had to track my version down on Tubi, so I watched it with some commercials. Tubi is great, by the way. I think horror fans know, but if you're a curious person that maybe doesn't realize how much access you can have to things by a free service like Tubi, obviously I'm not doing a fucking ad for Tubi, but like it's pretty much, it's becoming like the go-to horror streaming service, which is hilarious because there's a dedicated horror streaming service that I wonder what I'm paying for every single month. I just, you know.
Yeah, if Shudder wasn't so inexpensive, I probably wouldn't have it. I mean, I'm enjoying the Joe Bob, which I didn't before because I thought he was a very different person than he actually is. So I've been enjoying that, but it's only seasonal, right? So it's not all of the time, unfortunately. And a lot of their films that I'm not interested in any originals typically, and I'm not interested in series. Some of the films just, they're things I've seen before or aren't interested in, unfortunately. Equally inexpensive is the Arrow streaming service, which is handy. Not everything that comes to Arrow comes to the Arrow streaming service, but they do get a lot, and it's pretty curated, and it's almost the same. So the two services together give you a kind of good horror experience. But yeah, there's a reason that the Horror Spinsters do To Be Tuesdays, because it is like a horror go-to. I really ought to check it out more often than I do.
Yeah, the ads I thought I would find more annoying than I actually do. They're quite short. It's a far less painful than a YouTube ad, if I'm being 100% honest. So I definitely think it's cool to check out. Plus, Terrifier 2, you can watch it right there.
We found a South Park channel that was really cool. It's like 100% 24/7 South Park, and we're digging that.
Yeah, funny show. What was I saying? Fuck all that, Liz. We're here to talk about Dog Soldiers, a movie that we have not really mentioned much in the 18 minutes we've been talking. What is this movie even about, anyways?
Sometimes it's the right time to shoot the dog, but it's not the time you think. And it's certainly not at the beginning or end of this film, because one of the few times where I would be 100% behind this not hurting the dog. The other time is obviously a John Wick film, but this time, adorable dog actors, the best werewolves I've ever seen. And the two go paw in paw or hand in hand, I think. Great time to not shoot dogs.
Wow, sounds like you really learned a lot from this film.
I did. I think it's an animal lover's delight, this film. If all the times that we've talked about films where we've had to be like, oh, and by the way, there's this moment of dog violence or violence against a cat or whatever, feel free, romp, in the wilderness with your animals watching this film. You will be fine as an animal lover, unless you're a werewolf lover and you count them amongst our four-legged, half of the time friends, because there is like definite werewolf torture in this. There's all sorts of horrible violence toward werewolves. The only thing that maybe would count, although you don't see like the actual animal violence would be off screen, if it wasn't just a dead cow that they found on a field or died of natural causes, there is a dead cow in this. So all of my talking about no violence toward animals, there is a dead cow, but you don't really see it. You mostly hear that it's a dead cow, right? But yeah, the dog makes it.
I want to point out about that dead cow that they are sitting around doing what you do in a war movie, because oddly, this is a war movie in a way, military centric, let's say. They're not really in an actual war, but they're all sitting around having war stories, and then like a bloody sandbag, a cow is hurled into their camp. They seem shocked for the same amount of time that it would be that if your dog knocked over something in the kitchen. And you're like, what was that? Oh, it's a mutilated dead cow. Anyway, we'll figure this out in the morning. Everyone take watch. It died of natural causes. It's shredded. They don't care where the predator is. You'd think that if they, it's just an animal, maybe a bear. Do you think the bear would want the thing that it killed so it could eat it? Like, is anyone worried about this whatsoever? No, they're not, Lydia, because the footy game is happening right now, and they're missing it.
Your point about the bear is valid, because bear could store half-eaten food up a tree, and it could have fallen out the tree. And that's sort of what I was thinking with like the werewolves. Like, spoiler alert, the dog lives and this is a werewolf movie, but the werewolves could have put the cow up in a tree to eat for later. Me and Chris were discussing this last night, because I think that is the one and only flaw really that we have, because we do own this movie. I own it on a removable. I used to have a burnt copy of it back in the day when it was really hard to get a decent copy of Dog Soldiers, and Chris he's owned it several times as well, and he has 2 of the most recent releases, so we can compare the actual definitive editions of Dog Soldiers if we really felt the need, which we have actually, because of the 2 times we've watched it in the last couple of months. We've watched each one. Both very, very good releases. I'm very pleased to see Dog Soldiers in its final form. But like, we talked about that cow, and I just don't really care how the cow ended up in front of them on their campfire, scaring them. It could be that like a chupacabra, it just went flying through the air and dropped it, or it threw it over its shoulder. I had a theory about the other army guys had left it as bait for the werewolves, and the werewolves grabbed it and tossed it as a show of strength before they attacked. Who knows? Something like that. But the idea that it was up in the tree to eat for later seems to be the one thing. But you're right, a bear could have done that too, and they should have been way more scared.
Well, I guess my point is they don't know what did it. And they don't seem... It doesn't really even seem like a priority. It was just a sense... it's a movie, and so a movie's got to move, and this was to break up that scene so they could just wrap it up, because we just had a bunch of men sitting around telling a very long story, and then someone goes into a joke that probably wasn't funny, and they're just like, okay, we're done with this joke, just end the scene. How are we going to do that? Chuck a cow carcass on top of it. Is there any follow-up to that? No. Your interpretation of it was brought up into a tree to eat for later and it just fell makes more sense to me than what I always just assumed was the werewolves were fucking with them. They're just, look at this, and they chuck it just to, there's definitely a sense of devilish glee when it comes to how these werewolves operate. Maybe they thought it was for a good laugh, the pack and that cow. They thought it would be a pretty good joke. Scare these fucking guys.
But then why not attack and tear them apart? That was like my only idea about that, is like if the werewolves were present when that happened. But then I think maybe would they have passed it off so rapidly, thinking that it was the B team fucking with them, the way that dudes on the job kind of mess with one another once in a while. Maybe they thought that, but they don't give a line that has us understand why they just go to sleep after that.
Maybe the idea is, well, we have 2 men on round the clock watch. Two guys are gonna watch, and then at 1, 2 more guys are gonna watch. So maybe that has something to do with it. Listen, I'm going to put this on Front Street with this film. I like Dog Soldiers. I think it's a fantastic film. I admire a lot about it, but I will say that I have some big fucking problems with this script that I didn't have perhaps in 2002. But that being said, I think that the only reason why I have big problems with it is because when this movie is good, it's fucking great. And I think all the acting is great. It's just the script. Like, I think the effects are cool. The way it's shot is cool. All the characters are cool. I love all the characters. There's not a bad character in the whole fucking movie. There's one character that's kind of perfunctory, but I'll get into her. I mean them. I'll keep it surprising. But so let me ask you this, Lids. We don't handle a lot of werewolf films, and when we do, we tend to talk about the biggies. We tend to talk about the werewolf films that a lot of people know, but not American Werewolf in London and shit like that. But there are a fairly good amount of werewolf films that are very well known to horror fans and not very well known to other people. What is it, do you think, about Dog Soldiers that made its cult following so fevered? And because people who love this movie fucking love it, and you and Chris love this fucking movie.
We do, to the tune of maybe not being like cult followers of it, but When I saw that Janine Pipe was publishing a tell-all sort of making-of book called Sausages on the making of Dog Soldiers, I wanted to buy it for Chris immediately, but he already had it. So, yeah.
Wow.
Basically, I believe that it's because Neil Marshall had the same sort of love of werewolf films as many werewolf film fans do, myself and definitely Chris included. He followed through on his promise to himself that he wanted to make a proper werewolf movie that didn't just rely on the conventions of werewolf movies of past, didn't want to try and follow in the footsteps of some of the best transformation scenes, just wanted to pull out all of the best looks and ideas of werewolf stories and put it into a new story. Then he also had the problem of budget. So what's cheap to shoot? Army dudes in the forest. Easy. Done. Sorted, as they say. All he had to do is marry those two ideas. And this script, I think really does work. I think it taps into major monster film madness of something like Alien, where Space Marines and sci-fi horror hasn't really been done since to the same tune. And when it came out, it was like the only one of its kind. I think it hits that same vein. So not only is it a fantastic werewolf film with a fantastic werewolf, a whole bunch of fantastic werewolves that look really menacing and believable, and the effects are very well done. It doesn't flop on the transformation where everyone hinges on. And I don't even think that it cheeses it badly. You know, it takes its cues from other great horror movies with monsters where what you don't see is the scarier thing, right? And it also takes cues from something like Alien, where you have these working class guys that you can relate to in this squadron of space marines. They're just space marines on Earth, that's all. But they're fighting something much like the Alien. So I think that it really just hit all of those buttons all at once in a perfect chord.
I never thought of that Space Marine angle that you talked about. I was going to probably take 500 words to inarticulately explain that the military, you don't really see that, and not think about film as a whole, and I would only be focusing on werewolf movies. But you're right, it's just a formula that people really like. People like to see a group of people who have all the training that they would need, more so than the average bloke, and see them go up against a superior animal. And wow, I just never really, when you were saying, I was like, oh my god, yeah, you're absolutely right, it is Alien with werewolves and some grainy film, but you know, even like the graininess and the darkness of the film works in its advantage. It looks great, I think. And there's some, like the very beginning, like it almost has the same quality as like Evil Dead or something like that, where you're just looking at something and you're like, oh man, this is such a rich picture, even though it's not crystal clear. It's a little blurry, everything's wet, it's dark. What I appreciate the most about this group of military men is they're competent. They're each one are like, there's obviously, I don't think anyone's more competent than like Cooper, but he's like a super soldier or something like that. Fucking throws his flashlight like he's Captain America and shit. But it's just fun to see them go up against these foes. I do wish that they tried to come up with something other than just keep shooting them when they know full well that it's not doing anything. I understand they do have a caper that goes very poorly for them about towards the last like 40-ish 50-ish minutes of the film. They try to do something that's not just shooting the werewolves, but I suppose like looking at it now, I'm just like, god, like they're just keep fucking shooting these werewolves. And it became weird to me that to your point earlier about the werewolves who, why don't they just rip them apart if they're the ones that threw that cow carcass? You keep asking yourself, what exactly are they waiting for? And because they have, maybe, is it the abundance of food? Is it where these men decide to hole up, where they don't want to just shit where they eat, or eat where they shit type situation? Do you think that could be what it is? Or I don't know, but there was just something about it where it seemed to drag. I kind of feel like this movie needs to have about 10-ish minutes clipped from it just to make it move a little far, like quicker for me. I feel like I wouldn't really suggest losing too many scenes with like the guys talking, because I think the characterization of everyone is so strong that I wouldn't really want you to lose any of that. So maybe just less back-to-back shooting windows, not to be a dick about it.
Yeah, I know, because we do believe that they're functional and skilled army tacticians, or however you pronounce that word. Like, they are at the top of their game as far as being a rung below special ops or special forces, because that comes into play in the storyline too. So we get it. We don't need to see all of the shooting. And there are some like slow-mo shooting scenes where it's like driving home the fact this is a war movie. And it is. And we don't doubt it, but we could have done without them. I think that's the only real trim that could have been had. And maybe some of the end, because it just sort of drags after like the big explosive ending, without spoiling it entirely. But yeah. I think you're right in the way, and then it would have fit into that crisp 88-minute mark for sure, because it's just like about 10 minutes over that. But I don't have any trouble with the scripting and the story as it is, and there are even some scenes that could have been longer. There's sort of a bookend moment at the beginning where the troop is troping through the forest, and they're whistling this little tune, and it's just very like Seven Dwarfs going to Snow White's forest or whatever. That's what it really reminds me of. They're going deeper into the forest, and it's just a little moment to show like a musical moment to show them in good spirits. And then later on there's another musical moment that shows them in the polar opposite of that, and they're not trooping to nowhere, they're stuck. And those musical moments just aren't quite long enough for you to reflect on them properly, and they're sort of jarring. So a little bit of ease in and ease out to those moments would have done well. So if they were going to like move minutes around, I would have really liked to see that happen. I think the idea that they just keep shooting is because they get where they're going fairly quickly in this film, about as quickly as you find the house in the Blair Witch remake. They get where they're going and they're kind of stuck. Same with the Ritual. In Adam Neville's The Ritual, they get where they're going kind of quickly, and then they're just sort of stuck there. Not like The Descent, where I had the same sort of idea watching Neil Marshall's great film, The Descent, where why didn't the creatures just pounce on them when they first got in the cave and just tear them apart? Why are they toying with them? Why do they seem so bad at hunting when they're obviously very, very good at hunting and their lives depend on it? Same with these creatures. But it's a different thing where the girls are going deeper into the cave. And of course, the threat is growing as they do that. The threat was there the minute that the cow dropped. They were in the werewolves' territory. They didn't necessarily go too much deeper into it. They went into their home, basically, but they don't move. They're not going deeper into it. The threat isn't really increasing. If anything, it's decreasing because the moon is going to go down. And they are eventually going to hurt enough of them. They've chopped their arms off. They've definitely hurt them. So they're going to eventually become not as effective killing machines if they just kept shooting them. So I don't know. Yeah, it is the only tactic they seem to really have. They don't try to trap them. They don't try to pit them against one another. I don't know what else you could do, but yeah, they just waste ammo.
When this film opens, we have a bit of a Chekhov's gun situation where you show a couple who are very instrumental to the plot in so much as they will come into play later. But it's a classic monster movie scene. People making out in the woods and then they die. One of them gets a silver writing tool as their mighty sword because they're going to be a writer. And we end there. And then we're introduced to what is basically our protagonist and antagonist beyond the werewolves because, and I was like, because of course it can't just be werewolves. There has to be like a more human element to it, and I don't mean that in a shitty way. I like this dynamic. I think it was pretty cool because if you think someone's a son of a bitch when they're not a werewolf, guess what? They're going to turn into one and become the biggest jerk ever. But we meet Cooper, and he is basically auditioning for this special ops forces with the good Captain Ryan, who wants him to do something that he's not willing to do. He wants him to kill a dog, and he refuses. He will kill a dog, but he won't kill a dog for no reason. It's a great line. But of course that costs him the promotion, or however you want to look at it. It costs him his seat in this special operations. So those two scenes happen, and then we are brought to the present, in which there is a training mission going on where this group of people is going up against a special ops unit, and guess who's in charge of that? If you didn't know Captain Ryan would be in charge of that, you're not paying attention, because of course he is. And tragedy is struck. They never really start their exercise because the first nightfall, those soldiers go missing. They're killed, and they encounter Captain Ryan, who's terrified. He is very obviously making reference to there's only supposed to be, well, like, why no one, I suppose he's traumatized, he's injured, they're trying to get him out of there, but no one seems to be listening to what the fuck he's saying. No one is stopping for 5 minutes to be like, wait, what are you talking about?
That happens later on in the film too with another line. But this one, he definitely says several times straight to them, there was only supposed to be one. And no one questions it. You're right. It's, yeah.
So this turns into them getting hunted by what we find out to be werewolves. We get some great gore in these sequences, I think. We get a really, really good disemboweling, and a very realistic disemboweling where someone gets disemboweled and they don't just like, oh, fall over dead. Like, this person is going to be a functional character for the rest of the movie. But the terror, my fucking guts are out. Like, it's like, and they're trying to put them back in and stuff like that. It's great. Like I said, the acting in this film is impeccable. I really like this scene quite a bit. I like the urgency. I like these soldiers trying to make their way in the dark, and then all of a sudden they encounter a great character that has a car and a plan, and she's going to get them to safety, or at least a place in which they can rest.
Yeah, there's not many houses or structures out here. Hence, I guess, why it is chosen for military exercise. We're not too far from a base Petawawa, CFB Petawawa, and they do a lot of things in the forests surrounding. And you'd think, Ottawa, it's pretty metropolitan. There's lots of little towns, but they can still lose a helicopter in the Ottawa River and no one hear about it for like weeks. Because we live right here. Did you know that they crashed a helicopter a couple weeks ago into the Ottawa River? No? Okay.
I had no idea.
I know. It doesn't seem like you can pull that kind of crap this close to town, but apparently you can. So you go out into what is supposed to be the Highlands of Scotland. There is miles upon miles, square miles, hundreds of square miles to do what thou wilt. Of course, there is only a house every 50 fucking miles in that sort of stuff. So she drives them in her Land Rover. I like the fitting of this. Like, you don't see power lines accidentally through there. They're the only sounds you hear. If you go to the forest around here, and we were walking near the conservation area just last weekend, you get pretty deep in the conservation area and you don't hear like cars and people and stuff like that. You don't feel like you're in a city, but you can still hear the hum of city. You can hear electricity going on somewhere. Like you can hear that hum. In this film, they do it pretty well. You don't hear a thing in that forest. You don't see a thing in that forest. You don't even see running water in that forest. It is just dense forest, much like in The Ritual or Blair Witch. You just see forest, and you really do believe how isolated it is. When she says that the nearest house is 50 kilometers away, then you believe it.
Yeah, and she brings them to this house, and you settle in as they settle in, because you get the picture pretty quickly. Okay, this is going to be our environment for the remainder of this film. This is a classic siege film, just like Night of the Living Dead. Keep the bad guys out. Now the difference is these guys have a lot of guns. They have a lot of preparation. They seem to understand that they are fighting creatures, animals, something in the woods. And you can see that since the officer in charge is injured, he's the guy that got disemboweled. Now, Cooper, our former or our would-be special ops guy, is going to be the one that is going to be doing his best. He's a very stoic, competent character who always has a plan, but not in a arrogant, unbelievable way. He's very patient with everyone else. Just a practical, good soldier type character. Easy to root for. Stressed out, but not panicking. And they still, while there's a lot of fevered pitches, they still have a lot of quieter moments in which characters can get out a little bit more characterization and talk about how they're feeling about things. So it comes off as there's a lot of sincerity in these scenes. I really like them. And also what I like, and I wanted your thoughts on, is like, what do you think of this farmhouse?
I love the look of this. It reminds me of the house in High Tension in a way. It looks almost like a French country home. It's a Scottish country home, same sort of idea, European old farmhouse. And it is so old looking, and it looks like it would just blow away in a stiff breeze, really. But then it's obvious that it stood there for hundreds of years, because it is like some sort of slat and plaster construction. And it has lasted a very long time with a thatched roof and not many outbuildings, like one little barn, it looks like, outside, but it's sort of blended in to the forest. If you didn't know it was there, you'd probably walk right past it, you know? So I really like the look of it, the look of the inside with the homesteading. They have some family photos, which Cooper remarks upon and sees the family that is supposed to be there. And they're worried that this family's being eaten by werewolves or whatever it is outside, because they haven't really had that conversation 100% yet. They do find the stove is still hot, so whoever it was had vacated not long ago. There's a pot of stew on the boil. So they get set to making tea, boiling some hot water to take care of their captain, and chowing down on a bit of the soup, which has like a pork flavor. They're not really sure what meat it is, which raises questions, which I didn't have the question until I read Janine's Pipe Book Sausages, that's probably human meat in that soup that they're eating. Didn't even think about it. But anyway, I digress.
Me either, until you said it.
Yeah. Didn't even dawn on me until reading that.
I'm very obsessed the entire time we're in this home with the good china. I can't, every time the thing of plates, my grandmother had an apparatus like this with just plates everywhere, decorative plates. These plates are, they're the white and the blue kind. You've seen them a million times. Every granny, they've probably been in the family for 100 years. And that something's going to happen to those plates. But
those were probably Wedgwood china too, which is like indigenous to the Isles. And we had coronation roses. We had like Queen Elizabeth coronation china. My in-laws have china. My sister has a set of china, which is green, that is based on the hunt. So there's like so many different like styles, but I'm pretty sure that they're tossing Wedgwood around later on.
I wouldn't be surprised whatsoever. I'm actually surprised how much that those things survive throughout a vast majority of the film. Even when bullets are flying, people are dying, things are going crazy, these werewolves create utter chaos around them, and then they'll still slow down for 5 minutes and someone will have a conversation, and I'll just be like, man, those fucking plates, they didn't hit a single one.
Well, I guess we really wanted to dig into it. These are properly bred Scottish boys. You know, their real interest, aside from their military careers, is having nice hot tea and getting the score of the football game. You know, that's really their point, their joie de vivre. So they would, of course, not want to hurt the china because they were raised properly, and the attackers have a link to that china, of course, because yes, this is one of the scenes where, you know, everything is kind of quiet for a minute, but then we're like, oh yeah, we have to bring our captain upstairs and patch his guts up because they're still fucking falling out of his stomach, and he's not in a good way. The guy that they had originally found, Captain Ryan, he had his guts probably falling out from a horrible laceration, but he seems to be doing pretty okay. So they don't have to really worry about getting him to safety as much as they had. Now to get their captain patched up, they go to bring him upstairs, and as they're doing that, the girl that they've been rescued by, Megan, says, I know how to kill them. And someone howls in pain as they're trying to bring this guy with his guts hanging out of his stomach upstairs, and no one even says what. No one hears what she said. She doesn't repeat herself, and it's like, whoa, record scratch. What did she just said? I know how to kill them. Okay. Does it go anywhere? No. Does anyone ask her? No. Do we hear any more about it? Not till... Well, no, actually we don't. We don't ever hear what she had to say about knowing how to kill them.
The Megan character, when she is introduced to the story, she is a zoologist that knows things. She is going to be the perfunctory expert character who is going to catch the boys up to speed, in theory. Or that's all I could think of when I was watching this film, because I like to look at stories and say, okay, every character needs a function and a need, one or the other, both preferably. So I don't know what she wants, but I know what her function in the story is. They need someone who knows the lay of the land. They need someone to maybe help them fucking interpret what they're going for. Except the only thing that we keep learning again and again is, well, they just can't really seem to do anything. They don't have the equipment that they really need. And the lack of silver, which I always thought was really funny until you get to the twist. You're like, of course this house has no silver in it. But man, how do I say this without being shitty? This Megan character, even when you get to the revelation, does not work. It doesn't work at all. And I can't with it. It seems like every time that this character is doing something or saying something, it's particularly when you know what's going to happen, I feel like the story just comes to a screeching halt because, like you said, they're not really listening to her. So like all her expert knowledge, which, by the way, I don't understand what she's doing. I don't. She's like, when the big reveal happens, and I won't dance around it too much longer because it is important to dive deep into it, but it makes even less sense. So the Megan character is all fine and good, whatever. What I really like is this fucking guy screaming his goddamn lungs out because they need to patch him up. The sequence in which they need to knock him out is one of the most hysterical things that I've seen in ages. Like this scene is so fucking funny. Him screaming and calling, like, knock me out. And Cooper does not hesitate for a second and just wails him right in the face, and it does not knock him out. And then it's like, come on, you fucking pussy. And he punches him again, and it finally works. It works on me every time. I think it's so funny.
It is fantastic, and it has the one-line sausages within it when he looks down and sees his guts, and they actually were sausages. So he might have just been not knowing they were rolling and looked down and went sausages. But I always think of that as the wood shed or work shed moment from Evil Dead, where they had to put in like what he was thinking, because it wouldn't have made sense why he went to the work shed without thinking work shed. So he had to think out loud work shed. We don't see his mouth move, so it's perfect. Sausages works on that same level for me entirely. I'm quite grossed out. There's two scenes in this that are very cringy to me, and the idea of putting super glue on an open wound is terrifying and painful. I can't imagine how that would feel. I would want to be knocked out for that too. I wouldn't want to endure that. But yes, Megan, I totally do agree. She is written kind of awkwardly, because even her motivation later on, it's sort of like she has a few lines that all contradict one another, all in a little crummy bouquet near the end, and it is not very strong writing. And you think you know her motivation, but then it contradicts itself, and then again, rapid fire, and it's not fair, because we're trying to get to know her, we're trying to feel for her throughout this film, and then we kind of have it all pulled out from under us at the end.
When people start dying again in this film, I really there's two things that I think stand out among everything, and I'd like to know your thoughts. First and foremost, before we get into like more of the gore and stuff like that, I want your thoughts on the werewolf design, because I think in my mind I can't tell which one I like more, this or the Howling. I feel like the Howling informs this design, but there's something even more gnarly about this werewolf design. What do you think?
Yeah, there really is. There's something really otherworldly and uncanny about the look of them, and the stretched limbs, even more so than the tallest werewolf in the Howling. It's like exaggerated, but only enough to a believable degree still, and not over exaggerated. The faces of these werewolves is so much more dog-like and so unhuman that it is terrifying, way more terrifying than the wolves in the Howling, especially when you get to the kind of cute puppy dog looking werewolf at the very end of the Howling, because it's always like the cutest little husky dog face and just the wiggly ears and little sniffy nose. There's none of that. There's nothing that takes you away from the sheer terror of these horrific monsters. They are horrific monsters, and that is really it. And I think they did really well with casting people from the local ballet and people who had been in Cats. So they had these motions down and were able to move. So that together, like that body horror, along with the facial features, the makeup, all of those things, the very slight amounts of CG that are not really apparent, really work very well for this monster. I'd have to say they're the best werewolves I've ever seen on film.
It's hard to argue with that, honestly. Like I said, I want to go back and watch the Howling again, well, when we do the Howling next, but in this case, there was just so many scenes, particularly when they realize that one of the werewolves has made it into the upstairs bedroom, where if you take the camera angles and the lighting, it's backlit, its arms are outstretched, it really reminds me of Close Encounters of a Third Kind. Just that moment when that alien sort of spreads its arms and you look at it and its limbs are so unnaturally long and spindly, and it's supposed to look angelic, I suppose, in that film, but it ends up just looking very creepy and gross. And this is that, except it's hairy and looks kind of wet at the same time. And you could just and the way that they repel it almost has a magical totem quality, because they're using cameras to flash it, overwhelming its eyesight. We get an idea of how these creatures see. It's a bit like, it's not like Wolfen, but if you remember Wolfen, they had that kind of like thermal imaging when they were showing how the wolves looked, or what their perception was like. This is a, what would you say? It's like a grayscale night vision type look. And you can tell that when the cameras flash, it blinds them and forces them back. And I just think that there's something very eerie, and in a weird way, I never think of werewolves as supernatural creatures, but in this film, they seem it seems magical. Maybe it's because it's taking place, they're in Scotland, and they're in these old woods, and that has contributing factors to it. But I just gotta say that it almost erases any problems I have with the film in any narrative sense, because this is so well done. Like, if you came here for a cool looking monster, it will deliver.
Yeah, and it's more than one too, and they're not super different looking, but only slightly different looking, where you can tell them sort of apart. And I guess if you spent more time fending them off from your country home, you would get to know them a little better. But at first sight, there's like, oh, this one's a little larger, that one's a little darker furred, and that one's got a little longer fur there. They're very similar to the Howling werewolves. The only other films that really have that same level of creature design as far as the werewolf goes, maybe American Werewolf in London Transformation is a little bit cartoonish, but the end result is very similar to what we're getting here, with elongated limbs, the backwards jointed legs, but very wolf face, very, very wolf-like face. Late phases, Howl, the more recent film, definitely have a similar looking, very wolf-like wolf men. I think that having like the Howling being one of the more definitive ones that really reinforce the idea that these are a breed, and it's like they don't want to be subject to ethnic cleansing. That's more of like their motivation for hiding the way that they do. And they have linked that sort of lifestyle to the Romani lifestyle. So we already have like this idea of what Romani lifestyle would be. So we're linking that to werewolf. Takes all the mysticism and stuff out of it. Where here we have them more closely linked to, yes, forest creatures and the fae. And we're like, okay, I can see that supernatural element being even more pronounced, even though it's not really talked about. That's one thing, I guess, was the point of this, is to not rely on those old conventions and tropes of werewolves and like where they come from. They don't really talk about that, but we're having to guess. And considering where they live and how they've lived for so long out there, there is more of a mystical creature, a more mythological reason for their being.
We have forgotten about our friend Captain Ryan. Lids, you want to talk about a dude that is not interested in keeping the secrets of his mission whatsoever, because even when he's not just, they have these moments where they're like, what are you talking about? What do you know? What's going on here? And he gets all stone-faced, and I'm not telling you anything. And every time they're not directly questioning him about what the fuck is going on, he's essentially just standing around like, I know some secrets. I have some secrets, Maybe I'll tell you. And like, well, what do you know? No, I'm not telling you anything. Fucking pricks. Fuck you. It's like, you'll never understand what's really going on here. And then like they all try to like go back about their business and focus on surviving. And then he's like, but I know some things, you know. It's weird. It's a weird vibe.
Yeah, last word with Ryan there. And they don't really pay any attention to all of this, like, kind of preening that he's doing, this sort of like, I don't know what it is he's doing. He's leading them until she says, shut up, Ryan. And they're like, you know him? And they like all of a sudden are zoomed in on the fact that he's been out there before and she knows him. And this is like maybe the last fifth of the movie when this happens. You might recognize this guy, Liam Cunningham, that plays Captain Ryan from
Game of Thrones.
From Let Us Pray.
Oh.
From Let Us Pray. He plays Satan, basically, Six, in Let Us Pray. And I have to say, I didn't recognize him because so much time passed between this and Let Us Pray. And he's aged so well. Like in Let Us Pray, he's just such a distinguished looking gentleman. And here he's just a very typical villain goon looking guy. So I didn't even recognize him until I looked him up to see what else he'd been in. And yeah, Six from Let Us Pray. And a whole bunch of other stuff. But I just really loved his performance in that film. But yeah, it was weird because when they figure out that he'd been out there and that the zoologist had been on secondment to the special ops because they want to make a race of what? Super soldiers out of these fucking werewolves?
They want the werewolves from the dream sequence in American Werewolf in London. That's what they want.
Basically.
The weird caginess of these characters makes somewhat sense. The story of Dog Soldiers is quite clean. And again, to your point, comparing it to Alien, or Aliens even, is apt because those are very clean stories. You get a bunch of people, they have a mission, the mission is compromised because a creature that no one ever expected really exists and is now hunting them, and they need to use all of their skills to survive about an enemy that they scarcely understand. Except you have characters here that, for reasons that are not clear, want to be helpful, but also don't want to be helpful, want to survive, but don't want to survive. And Captain Ryan, he definitely has been injured by a werewolf. His wounds have started to heal. And we know as an audience member what that means. So maybe that's why he is just allowing it to happen. Although it's to be understood that he is going to be, I don't know if he would like join the pack or if he would go off and do, I'm going to be my own werewolf man and not be part of this pack, because this does seem to be a close-knit family. Mm-hmm. But then there's and I guess I'm just going to go ahead and go further with the Megan plot twist, because they obviously determined that this farmhouse that they're living in belongs to the werewolves, which to me explains why once they figure that out, they just go whole hog in destroying the place. Because there's this sense of like, we're just going to break your house as much as humanly. Fuck these dishes. We're going to smash these dishes. We're going to break down walls. We're going to shoot through floors. We are going to make it miserable. They already tried to blow up the barn, which didn't go well. And again, it's all predicated on this idea that Megan is one of them. But I don't understand, what is she helping them or is she not helping them? Because like you said earlier, she says she's doing both.
Yeah, it makes no real sense to me. And the fact that she didn't, if she was helping her family, which she does at the very, very end by letting all the werewolves into the house, why didn't she just wolf out at so many of those quiet times? Because they have a conversation, because these are guys that don't really understand werewolves. None of them are werewolves. But they're like, how come he's not, and they're talking about Ryan, just wolfing out? And they're like, well, maybe it's like taking a poo. Like you have to go, and once you have to go, you can kind of hold it. You don't just like drop it right there. You can like get to a toilet at the very least. And it's an interesting conversation that I wish they would have fleshed out a little more, because it's hilarious, the idea of the wolfing out. coming from laymen who barely understand it. But it also at the same time informs us, like, well, if they have any sort of control over this, about like the full moon, whether they have control over this or not. Ryan obviously has either control or it hasn't taken hold of him yet. But then knowing that she has a choice, and she's choosing to not be a werewolf all that time. She could have torn them apart at any moment. But up until that very confusing line near the end, she's like right before that, actually moments before, she says, I've tried to escape this fucked up family all of this time, and I thought you were my ticket out, but you weren't. And it's like, yeah, well, you could have helped them a little more or something, or told them the whole truth from the beginning, and that would have helped if you really wanted out of here. And then you wouldn't have sabotaged your ticket out of here moments ago, and then you wouldn't open the back door moments later. Like, it just makes no sense, unfortunately.
She, knowing she is a werewolf, she knows she is a part of the pack of the werewolves that are hunting these men. She brings them to the farmhouse when she could have not have done that. She either allows or is aware that, or the pack themselves destroy her vehicle so they can't escape, presuming that she would never need it ever again. But she might want that as a human zoologist 99.9% of the year. Then she concocts a plan for them to essentially destroy the barn, because the idea is that's where the werewolves live, and not only destroying, in the process, destroying another vehicle and destroying more of her own property. She then proceeds to, like you said, after all of that, does her big reveal by doing, like, it was almost as if the script was trying to come up with, like, ad lines for the movie. Like, imagine if a werewolf movie was imagine if a girl was a werewolf and there was a movie about her. Can you think of an ad line? Well, what about, you say all women are bitches. Well, I'm the real thing. And then, if that's not enough, I'll cook up another one. It's that time of the month. Yeah. Where I'm just like, what are these lines? And again, this doesn't ruin the movie for me. And it's not her fault. The actress, she doesn't, it's the whole character is the problem. I don't understand. She's game with the material. She's trying, she's acting, like, she's in the moment. I could tell that it's just, I don't get it. I don't understand it. Now, also, they very unceremoniously, and that was that reveal, and we're going to blow her brains out before she even transforms. I guess that's the trick. As long as she's still mostly human, I guess they just die. And that's the end of it.
Yeah, then they could have killed Ryan. They should have killed Ryan, really, honestly. But these are also the guy that wouldn't shoot a dog on command. So I kind of get it.
When the werewolves, one of my favorite sequences in this film is when you have the surviving people kind of taken on their own, each one gets their own werewolf fight, basically. And they're sometimes they don't end well. Nothing really ends well for people in this film. But it's very entertaining. And that's when, I mean, like, they're throwing crap at the werewolves. They're like stabbing them. They're like doing anything they possibly can to try to get a handle on it. All the while, Cooper's, who has a very close bond with his actual captain, kind of like gets that his guts are no longer out, and he understands what they all understand, is that he doesn't have a lot of time left.
During these fights, some of our favorite characters bite the dust. So some of them already have, too. Like in the failed experiment to go and get the other vehicle, people get torn apart really effectively. And the gore is quite amazing. And this is the point where I just realized, on maybe what could be my 10th watch of this film, it shares a line with The Matrix. Because the beloved, one of the more capable soldiers and one of the more interesting soldiers named Spoon, gets totally torn apart by these werewolves. And when they come looking for him, they're like, when they've realized that their captain is turning into a werewolf, it's basically Cooper and him left alive. And he digs his watch out of the bloody pile of muck that is left of their friend. And he says, "Where's Spoon?" He says, "There is no spoon." And I finally got it last night. It was the first time that I had understand this line in film history. There is no spoon. Such a very important line from The Matrix, made only 2 years previous, appears in this film. I thought it was fantastic. It was the most fantastic Easter egg I had ever encountered in all of my film viewing history. And it was great. It was wonderful. But yes, time is definitely running out because their captain still has his humanity though, and they could just kill him right there. But of course, he is more dedicated than the other half werewolf people that we've dealt with already in this film. They're not out to kill one another or the rest of the troop. He actually still has some humanity really left in him.
He does, and it is bittersweet. This stuff always kind of gets to me. I always love when you have the noble, like, get out of here type situation, and you have a character that's willing to sacrifice himself. Oddly, it kind of reminds me of the ending of that movie Mosquito, with Gunnar Hansen like killing himself to blow up the. I know, right? I'm just like, hey guys, let me talk about the movie Mosquito that I'm sure everyone's seen. Like, there's a sequence in which Gunnar Hansen sacrifices himself to blow up a house full of giant mutant mosquitoes that are killing people, which there's a lot of similarities with this one. This actually gives way to a really effective sequence, which on the one hand I really like. On the other hand, if I'm being very, very nitpicky about the unfolding of the plot of this film, is I just wish that Captain Ryan had more of a connection to this family of werewolves than just a guy who got caught up in trying to capture one and then became a werewolf themselves. Because throughout the entire movie we keep going back to this family photo, we keep talking about this farmhouse is ever present, almost a character unto itself, this property, these people. They continuously make references to this family. We never see any of these families save for Megan, not a werewolf. We don't really know much about them other than the fact that they were an old family that's lived in this area for a really long time. And just like Megan, once they're kind of done with it, they're kind of done with it and them, it kind of just becomes this conversation or this moment between these two men who have a deep connection, and they set that up at the beginning of the film, and they go into the basements of this house where I bet you really liked this sequence where they had all these treasures and stuff for all of these kills. I bet behind the house that you can't see is a big old car graveyard or something like that. But
fingers crossed.
You have you have this moment between these two characters that seems deeply personal, and we're kind of done with all the other werewolves that we've spent the entire movie with. And I think it just seemed a little unceremonious to me, I guess.
It is. I mean, it is the other scene that kind of turns my stomach. Not all the cadavers hanging everywhere, which I learned from the Sausages book, were all the leftover cadavers from Event Horizon. So they had cadavers to spare.
Wow.
Yeah. So they just reuse, reduce, recycle, But Ryan had the sword that Spoon had found in this farmhouse, because it's a Scottish farmhouse. Of course you got swords just kicking around. And he had that stabbed through him as a werewolf. So when he comes to finally face off with Cooper at the very end in this basement full of cadavers and trinkets, he tries to shove it through his teeth, and the sound, the Foley work there is fantastic. Yeah, Wes is cringing.
Yeah.
It is so well done in the worst way, in that it is very cringeworthy, and I'm not very one to worry too much about Like tooth violence, like that scene in Mommy Dearest didn't bother me because it was like, is that called Mommy Dearest? Is that what that was called, that film with the twins?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mom, not Mama. I think you're right. Mommy Dearest. Yeah, you're right.
Am I? Why do I feel like I'm
You must.
not? No, it's something else. It's got to be. No, it is a different. It's something else.
Oh. Yeah, it's the bandaged mom movie, right?
Yeah, and they remade
Yeah.
it not too long ago. Good Night, Mommy. Oh my God.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah, like the teeth scene in Good Night, Mommy, where I actually witnessed a theater walkout during. Like that sort of stuff doesn't really bother me, but this one, it's probably because the sound is so on point. It's horrible, but yeah, you don't see any more of the werewolves. Granted, the sun is coming up. Granted, they've probably transformed into human form and they're probably naked in the forest, wondering where the hell they are. If that's true, because we don't talk about those sorts of things with the werewolves in this movie, whether they come to and remember what they've done, whether they come to and have left their clothes somewhere in anticipation of being naked, or what? Like what actually happens on detransformation? Do they detransform at all? Are they strictly nocturnal? Those are things that aren't even answered in this. And some werewolf things, like if I can talk about werewolves for a second, I've always wanted to see the werewolf movie where they don't just turn into a werewolf like they would in comedy, you know, the cloud goes over the moon and they turn back to human and the cloud goes away and it's a full moon again and they turn into a werewolf. Like, yes. Do they turn into a werewolf slightly with the phases? Like a week before the full moon? Are they sort of like a half wolf? Like, does that happen? So when the sun comes up, what really happens? Ryan hasn't fully detransformed. Is it like other films or things where he gets shot and turns into a human as soon as he dies? Is that, how this is going to work? But yeah, so they don't really get into any of that. So we don't know where the other werewolves are. We know that they weren't in the barn. Yeah. Did they all get blown up? Did they escape that fiery ball of fire that their house turned into?
My sense from watching the film was that we're supposed to believe that for whatever reason this worked. So you could shoot them 120 times with fully automatic weapons. That won't kill them. But if you blow them up, that does work. And maybe Megan was at least giving a partial truth to that when she suggested that they blow up the barn and they go and, there's that great decapitation scene and stuff like that. It's like, I always love a good severed head and shit. But so maybe there's a partial truth to that. But I also would just imagine they were just thrown from the building and it didn't, they got like a lot of like Wolfman's got nards energy where like they can just like reform and fling back together and then they're just fine again. Maybe that is what happened. At the very least, they're effectively out of the story. So whether or not they're dead or not, I suppose we'll leave that to you, dear listeners, headcanon, and you can just tell us if you think that they're dead or not. I just assumed that we're supposed to believe that they're dead. The pen is mightier than the sword, though, because there is a bit of silver in them thar hills, Lydia. And we go back to our sequence in which, we have that pen. I liked, even though you know where it's going, I really like that aspect of this film. I think it's part of just clean storytelling. You have you set the scene up with this couple and that silver pen, and then you can revisit it towards the very end. You talked about the photography, and there's like newspaper clippings. There's all kinds of stuff that kind of that wraps up this movie. But you, as the photographer, I want you to give us a lowdown, because I know you like this sequence quite a bit.
I do, and the thing is twofold why I like it, because they're using something that we could conceivably say was created during the making of this film, whether we view it as they staged these photos after. They did a pretty good job of doing that either way, but I'd like to pretend that these were actually the films that they developed from the camera that is used within the film while Megan is flashing the flash to scare them, that these actual photos were taken. And it would show to me just how effective these costumes are, because that looks like photos that you would take with a flash at night in a house while a werewolf was attacking you. They did a very, very, very good job of staging those photos. Whether they were really staged or not, I don't really know. That's one thing I don't know. But yeah, I really like this tactic, and I always think there's more of them. Every time I watch, the only disappointment I really have is that there aren't like 10 of these photos. And she also flashes it quite a few times out the window. So you'd like to see some more close-ups. You know, if you've ever taken a close-up of a dog's snout because the dog's coming at you while you're trying to take a photo, I had a feeling that that's what it would look like. But maybe the cuteness would have outweighed the terror, so they didn't do it. And I believe it's a silver letter opener that he stabs him with, the only silver in the whole house. But it still doesn't answer when Megan says, "I know how to kill them." I would love to go back in time and be like, what is the answer, Megan? Is it fire, or is it the letter opener downstairs? Which is it? Which is it? Because they both seem to work, I guess. There was supposed to be a sequel. It's been rumored off and on here and there. It's probably never going to happen. I'm not holding my breath. Unlike I'm holding my breath for a remake of The Entity by James Wan, I'm still holding out hope that that'll happen. I hear about sequels to this. I think that my typical like film watcher, film lover person just wants a sequel because this was so good. That's why I want a sequel. I don't care which direction the story goes in, but there was ideas apparently of a trilogy for this, and it didn't hinge on those werewolves having survived in any way, shape, or form. It was Megan's blood that survived the explosion.
That'd be pretty interesting. I think that there's no reason why you can't do it for all the fucking things that get sequels these days. And it may be one of those things where the lore, the look, everything I did like about this film could be improved upon or carried over, and maybe some of the weaker story elements would change when you tried to tell a different kind of story. At the same time, there is something pretty special about little movies like this that just exist on their own, and it's just, oh, Dog Soldiers, you haven't seen Dog Soldiers? That's a great flick, let's check it out. And I do think, like, I know that listeners, I know I was coming at this movie certain plot points kind of hard, but I really, like I said, I think that the movie is great, and everyone is really bringing their all to it. It's just some of the writing, but that doesn't ruin anything. Like, it doesn't have to be fucking perfect, but I really think that I like the fact that it's just by itself. It's just a good singular werewolf experience, because as we might learn later, perhaps in another movie franchise with werewolves that we're going to be talking about, sometimes you probably should stop at one. Yep, I can agree with that. Unless you really want some really fantastic end credit music, then by all means go forth. But I think that this one, like you said, like before we started recording, how your memory of it was, I made it a far more stronger movie than in actuality it was upon rewatching it years later. And I think a lot of people are better served by remembering how fucking amazing this movie was, if they're going to compare it to what they thought. I love it being this time capsule of Neil Marshall's filmmaking expertise. It was his featured directorial debut. It was his feature writing debut, I think. I'm not really clear on that. But yeah, it explains a bit of that. Like, it is a sophomore attempt, and boy, did it work. 2 and some million pounds of budget,
5-some million pounds at the box office. It had a very turbulent home release that saw it being released in like a very poor quality for years and years and years. Fans didn't get it released properly onto a home media. So it just had a very awkward kind of history that way, where it probably could have garnered more money, but then maybe people wouldn't have had bolted in their mind that experience that they had watching it, where it was the singular best modern werewolf movie they had ever seen in 2002.
Yeah, now that you're saying that, I don't think I've ever physically seen a copy of this movie in person.
Really?
I don't think I've ever seen it. Came out on DVD, right? It must have.
I don't know if it did. I don't know if it did. I know it was VHS, and then I know there were burnt copies floating around for a long time before it came out in Blu-ray. So I'm not really sure about DVD specifically. It must have, but it was crappy. It was a crappy transfer. And the first Blu-ray was terrible, even worse. It was better to watch it on VHS at the time than to watch it on the Blu-ray that Scream Factory put out, because they hadn't sourced original film to make their transfer off of.
I had no idea. That's very surprising.
Yeah, it was a real mess, because the first time I had watched it was a rip version, and it was a bad version. It was terrible. And then another version I saw was a rip that might have been a screener for a film festival that was not bad. So people knew that there was a good copy out there, and then finally they used the source material in the last few years to make a couple really good releases. So yeah.
That's really cool. What do we got next for them, Lydia?
Coming up next, we have the definitive werewolf film. You may have heard us mention it already today, The Howling.
Yeah, I'm really excited to catch up with old Dee Wallace and all her friends and see what she's up to. It's so funny. I have a steelbook version of this film that I've literally never watched the whole thing. I remember I got it and I was like, I'm gonna watch The Howling, and I fell asleep. That's not an indictment of the movie, by the way. That's just I was tired, and then I was like, you know what, I'll catch up with this later, and I never did, but I will now.
We have a really good copy of The Howling 2, which we've watched, and not The Howling 2, but The Howling as well. But yeah,
gotcha.
The Howling is one of the few movies on VHS that made it through my entire life until I moved to Ottawa, and I may still have it kicking around here. I might have given it to you or given it away. I had The Howling in pieces.
You didn't give me The Howling. I remember you giving me a bunch of VHSs, and I didn't take The Howling or Pieces, which I should have taken both, but I didn't.
Yeah, I don't know what they may be somewhere around here to this day. I don't really know. But yeah, I'm pretty excited to revisit The Howling. I do love that movie. I even like the novelization and the books.
I had no idea those existed, but now that you say that, I'm extremely intrigued.
I'll have to dig them up for you.
Oh my God. Please tell me that they have extra scenes like all good novelizations do, where they get to like tell you like what everyone's thinking, which would have no way of being in the actual movie itself.
The only downside is that they don't come with an outro song.
But thankfully we do. And on that note, I'm Wes Knipe.
And I'm Typical Lydia.
And you've been listening to Dead Air. If you like this show, you can find more episodes and other content on splatterpictures.net, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you download your podcasts. You can also find us on TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram. The show is edited by Lydia Peever and hosted by Lydia Peever and me, Wes Knipe. We'll see you next time.